Hello, everybody. Welcome to what is going to end up being Breakdown's episode on the Madam Web movie that I'm about to go see in about an hour. I'm going to go check it out. I kind of wanted to do a little before and after thing because going into this movie, I don't have a lot of hope just based on watching the trailer. If you haven't seen the trailer, by all means, please go watch it. I don't have a lot of hope for this movie just from one very clear plot point is Madam Web as a character, her whole shtick is that she's clairvoyant. She sees the future, which I don't have a problem with. And I actually think puts her in a really interesting place inside of another character's universe, because this type of character normally plays like a support role, right? Madam Web traditionally is a secondary background character in Spider-Man comics who pops up when something dangerous is about to go down in Spider-Man's life, and she shows up and goes, "Spider-Man, there's a thing happening and you need to stop it. Oh my goodness." And then Spider-Man goes, "You got it, lady," and he thwips away, and she's mysterious and sits in the shadows. She's not a front leading, she's not the character that you would make a movie about in the Spider-Man universe. And so the fact that they picked this character to give a solo film boggles my no swearing mind. Like, I understand Venom, I vaguely understand Morbius, I can vaguely understand Craven. Madam Web doesn't make sense to me, and they're clearly going to try to fix this by introducing a number of the Spider-Woman characters. Specifically Julia Carpenter, Maddie Franklin, and Anya Corazon, all of whom are interesting and wildly different characters in the comics, and all of which I would argue could have the potential to be an interesting leading character in their own movie, in their own story. I don't think you're going to be able to do an interesting movie where you introduce your lead character, Madam Web, whose story is then going to take her into introducing or creating three other characters who I'm sure Sony is hoping could act as lead characters. Like, the reason, like, look, from a Sony executive standpoint, it's very clear what they're trying to do. They're looking at Madam Web and they're going, wait, you know what made a bunch of money? That Spider-Man No Way Home movie that had 3 Spider-Mans in it. You know what made a bunch of money? The Miles Morales animated Spider-Man stuff, the Across the Spider-Verse stuff. And you know why? Because it had a lot of spider people in it. I bet if we made a movie starring female spider people, that's going to make $1 million bajillion. And clearly somebody decided to crap that out into a script and turn it into an actual movie that, according to lead actress Dakota Johnson, has gone through many changes. So whatever it started as is not what we're going to end up seeing on the big screen. But I don't understand how you could have a movie where your purpose isn't to have an interesting lead character, but rather your purpose is to create franchise-worthy characters of themselves. The reason having Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire return as Spider-Man worked in Spider-Man No Way Home was because it was in service of Tom Holland's character as Spider-Man. It made sense as part of the plot, and both of those characters served to highlight parts of Tom Holland Spider-Man's nature and character and personality that he was struggling with, that he was coming to grips with at the time. These characters were able to step in and be an inspiration to him and help him choose to be a better character. Similar things are true if you look at the Miles Morales Spider-Verse stuff, where Miles is undoubtedly our lead character. He is undoubtedly the heart and soul of those movies, and he's a fascinating character in his own right, and characters like Gwen and Miguel O'Hara and Spider-Man Noir and Spider-Ham are used to highlight parts of Miles and challenge parts of Miles in a way that is interesting for the character and to help the character grow. And I don't think that we're going to see that in Madam Web, because we haven't seen that in most of the other things that Sony has tried to do with their Spider-Man universe. I think Venom as a character has a lot of storytelling potential, especially if you've read Donny Cates' run on Venom or Al Ewing's current ongoing run on Venom. They both have done such weird, crazy stuff with the character that there's a lot of potential there. Morbius, I don't think, had a lot of potential. If you look at the history of Morbius in the world of comic books, he's a very short-lived character. He typically shows up as a bad guy that you punch for an issue or two, and then he goes away. I have a hard time believing he could hold down like a series of films by himself. Madam Web has a really interesting role in that she's the perfect... she could have been the Nick Fury of Sony's Spider-Man universe, right? She could have been the character manipulating all of these things behind the scene to pull things together. And again, we know from the trailer that the bad guy is the character Ezekiel Sims, who in the comic book is part of a interdimensional race of beings called the Inheritors. They survive by feeding on the energy of spider totems, which are basically the spider people throughout the multiverse. And that's a really interesting threat, especially given what was just established in the Beyond the Spider-Verse movie with the Web of Life and Miguel and his team of spider people monitoring the multiverse to make sure things go well. Well, here's your predators, right? Here's your perfect bad guys for the army of spider people. Whether Sony's trying to create a Spider-Man multiverse of films or not, they've done it accidentally between the work previously done by Sony, the work done by Marvel, and now the work done by Christopher Miller and Phil Lord on Beyond the Spider-Verse. This is the perfect opportunity to have a hand-wrought group of bad guys and bring them into your universe and create some characters to fight against. And rather than having Ezekiel Sim kind of be like a stand-in as a bad guy Spider-Man, I really think Sony should have just had Madam Web be a character behind the scenes in the rest of these other crappy movies that they're putting out, who's gathering together a Sinister Six-style team who then has to stop their universe's Spider-Man, who would be evil. You do like Spider's Man, or when he becomes Man Spider and he turns into like half spider, half man kind of thing. You could have done a Spider-Man horror movie, which would have been way more in line with stuff like Morbius and Venom and, in theory, Kraven, and played up the aspects of, well, here are the things that would make Spider-Man a bad guy if he went bad. Like, what does a Peter Parker without morals looks like? We don't know in a movie universe setting yet, and you could relatively easily have done that. And then you set up characters like Morbius, Spider-Man, and Kraven as good guys trying to stop this threat which can outpower them and outthink them and outscience them unless they come together. And Madam Web's the one who's assembling a team to put them together. It could have been easy, Sony. It could have been easy. You made it hard for yourselves. Yeah. So I am interested in seeing this movie because I'll fully admit, I liked Morbius. I've said it in my review of that. I enjoyed the heck out of Morbius. It was, in my opinion, just about the best kind of Morbius movie you're going to get. I don't think anybody could have done a Morbius movie better than they did based on the source material. It looked pretty good. It acted well. The character looked right. There were a bunch of little like Easter eggs from the character's design that were stripped right from the comic books, which is what I want to see. I don't know what else you would have done, in terms of people being like, well, this is a bad movie. Other than drastically changing the character and rewriting a whole bunch of stuff, and I don't know what you could have done to make that character more interesting. The character is inherently a superhero plus a vampire. That's what the Morbius movie was. And like I said, I liked it. It's not new. It's not inventive. It's not super interesting, to be quite honest. But in terms of capturing the core essence of who Michael Morbius is as a character and presenting it in a big movie screen, I felt like they did a good job. And while I don't think they're going to manage to do it with Madam Web or the other Spider-Women who are going to be showing up, I want to see what they do. I don't think they're going to do a good job. And we'll see. And then we'll go from there, I guess. Wish me luck, I guess. Okay, I'm back from having seen Madam Web, and I've got mixed thoughts on it. I suppose the spoiler-free part of the review, such as it is going to be, it. On the one hand, it was definitely better than I expected. Out of Sony's recent Spider-Man list, Spider-Man projects, of what I've seen, because I did not see Venom 2, because Venom 1 wasn't good enough to make me care to see Venom 2. I remember Venom being pretty good. It was, again, clearly it wasn't good enough that I wanted to see more, and I liked Morbius. I would probably argue Morbius, Venom, and then Madam Web in terms of overall quality. There's like leaving the theater, I don't think it's terrible. I've certainly seen worse superhero movies. I've seen stuff that I've been more frustrated at or more upset at. And there's actually quite a few things that I liked about Madam Web. In terms of the overall review, the worst thing about it for me is the pacing is really weird. The movie opens up, I would argue, glacially slow, and it really takes its time to show you who Cassandra Webb is as a person and as a individual human being. And then when the thing happens that awakens her superpowers, the movie really takes its time establishing what those superpowers are and how they work, and creating an interesting visual device that lets you know that her powers are happening. And I actually thought that was one of the best things. The slow crawl of the opening felt more like almost a murder mystery action thriller kind of thing, and that really worked for me. That pacing worked really well. Once the bad guy Ezekiel really came into play and he started like hunting the characters and the characters were all thrown together, I thought that actually worked pretty well. And that's where you start to get into some of the weird pacing issues that the movie has, because the movie really wants to bring together Cassandra Webb over here, who can see the future, and then the 3 Spider-Women characters. And it wants to bring them together, but then it keeps ripping them apart over and over and over throughout the movie, which just seems dumb. Like, why? I'd said in my pre-show that the biggest weakness that I thought this movie was going to have is you're trying to tell 5 character stories, Madam Web, the bad guy, Ezekiel, and then the 3 Spider-Women. You're trying to tell all their story at the same time, and that's a lot of characters to cram into one movie and establish as individual characters and make important and feel unique and feel like they all have equal screen time. And the movie doesn't. It is very much a Madam Web movie where the bad guy doesn't really want anything to do with the lead character, and the lead character just starts showing up. Like, it feels so weird where Ezekiel's main nemesis throughout the movie, from his perspective, is these teenage girls. And from Cassandra's perspective, she's just trying to protect them, and she just gets in the way of things. It's really weird not having the villain of the movie actually be like you about it. It's one of the disjointed things that this movie really has going on for it. I've seen a lot of, in the spoiler-free reviews that I have watched, I've seen a lot of people complain about Dakota Johnson's acting as Madam Web, and I actually think she does a really good job as Madam Web. In the comics, Madam Web has always been a behind-the-scenes manipulator character. She's someone who pulls on strings to make things happen to other people so that good things can happen. She is inherently distant, she's inherently mysterious, and the Sony's reinterpretation of that character was to make Cassie emotionally distant and emotionally unsure of people in her life. She's socially awkward. She doesn't know how to get along with people. She doesn't know how to talk to people. And honestly, I felt like that was an interesting reinterpretation of kind of the distance that Madam Web normally has with a character like Spider-Man. Now, this one has it because she just doesn't know how to interact with somebody who is like charming and funny and is personable, because she's not that. And I liked that kind of re-envisioning of things. The problem, of course, with that kind of thing is that's not what we go to movies to see. We don't typically go to a superhero movie to see a socially awkward, unsure lead character remain socially awkward and unsure throughout the movie. I had the same complaint about Newt Scamander in the Fantastic Beasts movies, where on the one hand, I thought he was incredibly well acted, but the whole time the movie was going on, I was like, I just don't like this guy. He's just weird, though. And I say this as like a guy who is weird, like at work, just because you are weird and I can sympathize with, oh, okay, I get it. You have social anxiety. You don't know how to connect with these people. Like, that makes sense to me. Doesn't mean you're fun to watch on screen for an hour and a half. So on the one hand, I felt like that was an interesting reinterpretation of the character, and it's something that I personally felt connected to. But on the other hand, like I said, that's not who you want as the lead character in your hour and a half long superhero movie, whose role is specifically to connect with all of these other characters. I think Dakota Johnson actually did a really good job portraying Madam Web as this person who doesn't want to be connected to other people, but is forced to be connected through circumstance. I thought she did a really good job. It's the same complaint I saw people have with, I don't know the name of the actor, but the guy who played Icarus in the Eternals. Everybody was like, he's so stiff and wooden. I don't understand. I'm like, he's playing the villain of the movie for the first, 45 minutes to an hour of the movie before they even reveal that he's the bad guy, and he's interacting with people that he has known his whole life for literally thousands of years. Of course he's acting stiff and awkward. He's trying not to act guilty. He is standing in a room of people trying to solve a murder, knowing that he's the murderer, knowing that these people could find him out, and he's trying to go, I hope they don't figure it out, guys. Like, duh. Of course he's going to be stiff and wooden. I thought he did a fantastic job with what he was given to do. In much the same way I think that Dakota Johnson does really well with this interpretation of Madam Web. She's very clearly not the 80-year-old geriatric blind woman that I remember watching in the Spider-Man cartoon and seeing occasionally in the comics. But I think it works for a modern setting. I think it works in basic. As far as the Spider women characters go that do show up, Konark. So, take it down a notch, dude. I'm recording. Yeah, I am. I honestly liked the three Spider characters in the same way that, like, I feel like they did for this movie what Kamala Khan did in the Marvels, where their energy and their personality and their bubbliness and their acting really help sell so much more of the movie that you don't get from anywhere else for any other reason. I won't say the characters are incredibly well developed, because they're not. Maddie Franklin is perhaps one of... I was going to say she's perhaps one of the biggest reimaginings for this particular storyline, but honestly, they're all pretty intensely reimagined. Maddie, at least, was really enjoyable. She's a little bit of a problem causer. She's spunky and lively. She doesn't want to take anybody's crap throughout the entire movie. She's the one who has the most attitude to her, which gives her an interesting contrast with Cassandra, who's trying to be an authority figure without being, like, authoritative at all. She has none of that charm. She has none of that grace. She doesn't sell any of the things that she's talking about incredibly well, and Maddie is willing to call her on every bit of it. And I thought that worked really well. Anya and Julia, for the most part, looked fine, but honestly, they didn't really add much of anything in terms of the overall balance of characters. I feel like, again, I think I mentioned this in the pre-show, but I feel like Sony decided to use three Spider Women in this movie because they think more Spider people equals more money, based on the previous successful Spider films. And I don't think you needed all of these characters all at the same time to make a thing. They're not differentiated enough for anything to matter. Like, if I were to boil them all down into character traits, then Maddie is the character who's got the attitude. Julia is the apologist. And then Anya's the nerd out of all of them. That's the best you're going to get. There is no greater character depth than that for the most part. And I'm not going to say they're terribly written. They are, like I said, they're charming. I like them for the most part. And I like their interactions with Cassandra, but would I be sitting down to go, like, any one of these three characters could be the star of their own movie? Absolutely not. Ezekiel also suffers from not being enough of a character to actually be a character. If you did not like Dar-Ben in the Marvels, you're not going to like Ezekiel Sims. He is incredibly one note. His one note is, I'm going to kill people, and that's all he's got. Any of the rest of it, being handsome, being intelligent, being charming, none of it really comes into play all that much. We never get a good motivation for why he wants the things that he wants, except for that he doesn't want to die. That's the one thing we get. And I mean, I guess I get it. I don't want to die either. But there's also a degree of, like, we're going to die eventually. Like, I don't know. I didn't like Ezekiel's character pretty much at all. Like, he works as a bad guy in terms of he is a villain hunting down the lead characters. Yeah, I guess he works fine. I liked them playing him as, like, an evil Spider-Man. That was kind of neat to see on screen, and get to see Spider-Man, like, acting brutally towards the people that he kills a number of police officers throughout the course of the movie. And the efficiency and speed with which he does it is impressive. It's one of the things that makes you go, oh yeah, bad guy Spider-Man would be like a bad guy. And I also, this is a weird complaint I don't know if this is a me thing, but Ezekiel felt like all of his lines were read in a booth and then redubbed over the actor. They all felt like they came from a weird distance away from what was actually being said, and I don't know if any of that, like, I don't know what that was. I feel like it's a me thing, but it was really weird. I didn't care much for that. So, like, is this a terrible movie? It's not a very good movie. No. Is it terrible? I don't think so. I've certainly seen worse. I've watched the Sharknadoes. They're bad. Is Madam Web terrible? No. Is it really good? No. In terms of every Spider-Man thing I've ever watched, every Spider-Man movie, even the Amazing Spider-Mans, which I'm not a fan of, honestly, all the Spider-Man movies are better. Like I said, Venom's better, Morbius is better, Madam Web's fine. The thing that I really like about Madam Web is it really does feel like they tried to do something different with this than they've done with all the other crap that they've tried to do over at Sony. And it's just doing something different sometimes means practicing storytelling tropes and techniques that don't make for classically good stories, right? It's like opening a movie with one character and then you switch to another character halfway through and you never go back to that lead character. Of course that's going to be weird for people because that's not the way we've been trained over thousands of years to process storytelling. And I have a lot of those feelings that's kind of what Madam Web was. In trying to do something different, they also created something that we don't naturally like from a storytelling perspective. Which isn't to say that everything's bad, but it is to say that not enough of it's good to make you appreciate what is there. Into the spoilerific part of my review. Like I said, I honestly really like Dakota Johnson as this interpretation of Madam Web. I do think they did a really good job of setting up Cassandra as someone who doesn't connect well with other people. There's an extended scene at the beginning of the movie where Ben Parker invites her to his sister-in-law's baby shower. Mary, who's pregnant with her and Richard Parker's son, who is, of course, Peter Parker. Ben is pretty much the only person that Cassandra gets along with and, like, knows terribly well. And it's fun. It is fun to watch Cassandra be so incredibly awkward. For me, going into this going, oh, okay, the reason she's so awkward and terrible is because the course of this movie is going to be her learning to open up and connect to other people. And by the end of the movie, she'll feel much more like a naturalized person, which is what ends up happening, by the way, because it's the people that she connects with are the three Spider Women. So I think they actually do a really good job with Cassandra's arc from a narrative perspective. Again, opening as someone who doesn't connect with other people and doesn't want ultimately to connect with other people to someone who is forced by their powers to be connected to other people and then going, okay, I can't just ignore the people in my life. I can't, even though I didn't want them here, even though I tripped over them in my existence, I can't pretend they're not here and I can't pretend that I can't have an influence on their lives. So I'm going to. I just saw a video on Instagram, I think, while I was going to the bathroom of Paul Scheer on his podcast making fun of the fact that Madam Web inverts Spider-Man's famous classic line of with great power comes great responsibility. They invert it and say that when you accept great responsibility, you will gain great power. And for it, like, as a life thing, as a life motto that you can apply to anybody at any place and time, I would agree that's not a solid motto. But for the movie and the story that they're telling, where you've got Madam Web ultimately needing to accept the responsibility for these three girls to protect them until they are able to get whatever spider powers they do end up getting, that is when she gains the inner strength to defend them in a way that, quite frankly, she just wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Again, is that a good life motto? No. Does it work for Madam Web and this particular story? Yeah, I actually think that it works really well. I thought it was really clever inversion of the Spider-Man thing. And to me, it goes to show why a character like Madam Web isn't like, going out into the city every night and like beating up muggers like Spider-Man would, because for her, her responsibility is not to everyone in the world, like the way Peter Parker looks at it. Her responsibility is to the people closest to her, to protect the people that she can protect, where Spider-Man goes, I'm going to save as many people as I possibly can. Which, again, I think is an interesting difference between these two characters, and is pretty well done. Like I said, I don't like Ezekiel pretty much at all. And I don't even like him in like a bad guy way where you're supposed to dislike your bad guy because they're a bad guy, right? I don't think he's interesting. I don't think he's charming. He's handsome, I guess. I'll give him that. The moments when he is brutally efficient with the spider powers are some of the cool moments that you get from him. But then you run into these moments where he does like your classic horror movie stalker villain move where like, oh, I'm killing everybody else as soon as I meet them. But with you, Madam Web, I'm going to take my time and slowly approach you. Where everybody else, I just pick them up and break their neck and throw them to the side. It's bad writing. Watching the three eventual spider ladies interact, like I said, was a lot of fun. They had some good banter and some good chemistry with each other, even if I don't feel like they really have fully well-developed personalities. Maddie Franklin does at one point make a comment that she's going to call her Uncle Jonah and he's going to help her out. This is a reference to her actual uncle in the comics, J. Jonah Jameson, which I thought was really cute and a fun way to do it. I don't know... Like, if you're going to tell a story featuring Maddie, I don't know why you wouldn't use the J. Jonah Jameson angle, because it adds such an interesting wrinkle to your storytelling. But again, this isn't Maddie's story. This is Cassandra's story, so get out of here, Maddie. I did like Julia being the child of a divorce, because in the comics, Julia Carpenter, a.k.a. Spider-Woman, a.k.a. Arachne, a.k.a. the current Madam Web in the comics, she actually is divorced from her husband. She has a daughter named Rachel, I believe it is. And typically Rachel is with her in the comics. She has been since at least the 90s. But I like the idea of kind of bringing that aspect of the character, especially if we're never going to see Julia again. And given the absolute failure of Madam Web in the box office, I don't think we're going to see these characters again. I like them kind of taking the Julia and Rachel plotline and kind of readapting it to Julia in the current day and age. The biggest change to her that I didn't like was, for whatever reason, they made her name Julia Cornwall, or Cornwell maybe, instead of Julia Carpenter, and I just don't know why. And I like the Carpenter name because Carpenter is a type of spider. And if you're going to sit here and be like, well, we didn't like the name Julia Carpenter and Carpenter Spider because the spider connection's too obvious, your lead character's named Cassandra Webb with 2 B's. Her last name is literally Webb, and Cassandra was a famous oracle in Greek mythology, if I remember correctly. Could be Roman. So don't tell me that we can't play with cute naming conventions in our comic books, Madam Web creative team. So that's really the only thing about Julia that frustrated me, other than, again, she's the character who's like the most apologetic out of the 3 girls. Like, she apologizes about everything, it feels like. And then again, Anya loses like all of her backstory from where the character starts in the comics to this movie. She even loses her dad. And I actually just read the Anya Heart of the Spider ongoing series from like 2005, I think it was. I just reread that, as well as the follow-up one-shot, and then I'd started to read the Spider-Girl Big Time miniseries, and I honestly just lost interest because it's not very well written. But pretty much all of anything that makes Anya a unique and individualized spider person in those comics, thrown out the window. Pretty much the only thing that this movie keeps a hold of is the fact that she is Latina, and that when she's in costume, Anya originally, because she can't web swing, right? She doesn't have her own webs. She had a grappling hook that had like a circular spider-shaped disc on the end with like a green like gem on it, and she would like throw it and it would wrap around something and she would like grapple hook around essentially. Or she would use it as a weapon against her enemies. And you do see glimpses of that in the teased future Spider-Women's, I guess, project that Sony's never going to develop now. Otherwise, Anya's a completely different character. One of my favorite things from the Anya ongoing series was that she had a really cute, wholesome relationship with her father, which was just really fun to see, because typically spider people have a really terrible relationship with their parents or guardians in comics. So it was really fun to just see the two of them really enjoying each other, and him just being a great dad and her being a good daughter, and it was nice. Having it being updated to where he was an illegal immigrant and he got deported and she's just trying to like stay in the United States certainly reflects real world issues, and I do think is interesting. But it also brings a level of realism to the movie that then makes me start questioning, like, well, wait a minute. If the authorities realized that he was an illegal alien and they needed to deport him, are you really telling me that they didn't like investigate him enough to know that he had a daughter who's clearly enrolled in public schools? Because she's shown studying, like going to college and stuff. Like, what? What are you talking about? And then how is Anya paying for their apartment in New York City, nonetheless? And get like, I know it's 2003 New York City, but like, how is she paying for an apartment by herself and not having a job? She never brings up, like, when the three spider characters are pulled into Cassandra's web, she doesn't complain about, like, I need to get to my job, I'm going to miss rent or anything like that. Like, once you start to bring in those real world consequences, it shifts the way that I'm looking at your story. And then especially when you finish the movie and you reach the end and Cassie has become like the full Madam Web persona with like her blind glasses and everything. It really looks like the Spider Women are like living with her in her apartment and they're all just like one big found family. But like, what are you like? Maddie is very clearly shown to be going to like a prestigious high school. She's got like a blazer and jacket on. She's got friends. Are you telling me she gave all of that up because she trauma bonded with these three women over like a 2-week period? Really? All of these characters gave up their lives to hang out with Cassandra? Like, even when Cassandra does become like a full-time ally to them and they're all like getting along with each other, she's still not a likable character. She's still obnoxious. Like, I don't believe that these three characters would be like, I'll move in with you. I think they'd be like, I'll work with you, sure. I'll move in with you? That's weird. Like I said, I was honestly pretty invested in the movie until you reach a point where Cassandra has started to investigate her origins and where her powers came from, and she suddenly needs to take a trip to Peru. So she literally calls Ben up and she's like, hey, can you just babysit these three girls for like a week? I'm going to fly to Peru, find this ancient spider civilization that my mom tripped across when she was pregnant with me and almost died, and then did die, but I was born and I lived. I'm going to be gone about a week. Can you just keep an eye out for them? And it works. Like, to have this movie, like the movie, like I said, I think the movie worked really well from like a thriller pacing in terms of all of the story beats lining up and having this, like, once Ezekiel gets added into the plot and you're getting the pressure of him hunting these girls down, that stuff was all really working for me. And then Madam Web's like, I call a timeout, I gotta go to Peru, I'll be back in a week, everybody. And like, are you kidding me? All of the momentum of your plotline grinds to an absolute halt so she can go on a spiritual no swearing journey? And I'm not saying like it makes sense for the character to do this, but like from an hour and a half long movie storytelling point, it feels so incredibly awkward. And it's easily for me the thing that like I swerved the most on while I was watching. Like, what? Why is this the thing? Like, ugh, that's incredibly weird. And I don't like that aspect of the storyline at all. I don't know how you would replace it otherwise. I also, and this is just kind of a minor thing, this has stuck with me since I saw Thor: The Dark World in theaters. I've begun to hate when a movie goes, we're going to show you a thing at the beginning and then show you the movie, and then we're going to cover all of the material that we showed you in the beginning movie, but again. No. Floop you all over the place. You're wasting my no swearing time. I'm sitting here in the theater watching the movie. You don't need to reiterate the plot of the movie to me as I'm watching the movie, you idiots. I don't know how stupid you think I am, but literally they could have omitted the beginning scene of this movie with Constance, Cassandra's mother, and Ezekiel Sims. You could have literally just opened up with Cassandra in New York as a paramedic going about her daily life, and then weird stuff starts to happen, and then you get into why she's investigating her origin, and then it would have all have presented as new information to us. Interesting, in theory, hopefully, information to us. Instead of giving it to us twice, all of it was telegraphed. None of it felt new. None of it was super interesting. If anything, it's more weird to me that there's a group of superpowered individuals in Peru that dress up and climb around like spiders and nobody else has investigated or heard of them before. Like, yeah, all right, sure, I guess. I just, and I suppose as long as I'm going to complain about that, my other biggest complaint is that Cassandra has a hard time connecting with people for a couple of reasons. So her mother got mortally wounded in Peru. She was shot. Some people had her mother get bitten by like a magic spider. The spider gave superpowers to Cassandra in her womb, and Cassandra was born and her mother died. Somehow, some form of authority found and packed up all of Constance's camp, sent it back to the United States. Cassandra got a birth certificate made, and then she was put into foster care. And so I go, okay, I understand why she would have problems connecting with other people. Maybe she was shifted around the foster system a couple times and she resents her mother, so she had a hard time emotionally bonding with other families. This makes sense to me. Okay. Well, then why did she become a paramedic? Who becomes a paramedic to save people when you don't like people? That doesn't make any goddamn sense to me. Like, it would, like, and we're never given a reason why she was a paramedic, right? And in the comics, this is one of those things that you never get into because Madam Web's an 80-year-old D-list character who sits off into the shadows and goes, do this stuff, Spider-Man, and this will be the end result. Like, she is not a character who has a job or does things. Like, and making her be a paramedic actually works really well, and it plays into the storyline in a couple of ways that I actually think works pretty well for the character. For this being a new thing added to Madam Web, I think it worked really well and was pretty smart, and it gives her more of a purpose than just being a normal person. But why does she want to help people if she doesn't like people? Why is Ezekiel so driven to extend his own life for seemingly no purpose? Why is he so hands-on? At the beginning of the movie, they have a scene where Constance and Ezekiel are in the jungles of Peru hunting for this spider. And Ezekiel spooks Constance at one point, and he's like, oh, remember, I'm here providing protection for you. What are you talking about? What rich a-hole hires an investigative spiderist to go into the Peruvian jungle and risk their lives finding a spider that might not even exist and goes with them? Why does this guy think he's a capable soldier? Where are the goons? Where are some armed thugs? Where's the local militia that he hired to do the protecting? Why is he going down there? And you could say in the course of the movie, oh, well, he went down there because he didn't want anyone else to get their hands on the spider. What? Like, why wouldn't you just have her bring back the spider and then eliminate her from there? Wouldn't it be easier? Like, this guy had to go all the way to Peru and then all the way back from Peru. It's just, from a character development standpoint, the backgrounds of Ezekiel and Cassie aren't gone into and don't really make sense and don't help support their characters in any way. And that's the thing you're really missing from a good superhero story, is character depth. Character motivation. Why do these characters want the thing that they are going to such extreme lengths that they're going to dress up in silly costumes and fight people and shoot people and kill people? It's just so weird. And then as far as the tone being off, we get to the end of the movie and Cassandra has fully accepted her responsibility for these spider women's, and she has accepted that she needs to defend them and keep them alive until they can gain their own powers. Great. Like I said, I actually like that part of the plot line. I think it works pretty well. And she's accepted the point where she's so used to her future vision powers that in a combat sequence, she's using her future powers to guide them through a really dangerous environment. And again, I thought that was really well done. At one point, she gets her own Captain America shield to start blocking shrapnel with, which, okay, sure. But that stuff all really works, but they end up defeating Ezekiel not through a superhero fight, but by maneuvering him in such a way that like a bunch of debris falls on him and then he ends up getting like squashed like a bug. It's kind of neat, actually. And on the one hand, this perfectly fits who Madame Web is being set up as a character. Cassandra is not somebody who's going to like, even if you're a bad guy, she's not going to go out and like kill you. Like, she is not the type of character who's going to get in a superhero fight with you, right? And these other female spider characters who will become spider characters also don't have like the physical strength to go one-on-one with a super powered character like Ezekiel. And so they end up kind of catching him in a web, right? And they squash him like a bug, which, again, I think is kind of funny and kind of cute, and I think it works to a certain degree. There's a certain degree of, like, okay, let me finish my one point before I move on to my other point. On the one hand, I think Ezekiel's death perfectly fits the method that the characters used to stop him. All of the Spider Women make their own individualized attempts to stop Ezekiel, but they don't work because he's got spider powers, of course. And then Madame Web comes to her big moment of like, oh, I need to save these girls. This is what I am here for. And I think that works really well. And then the characters set him up to where he dies. So like in terms of the overall story structure, I actually think that the final confrontation with Ezekiel works really well. However, it wasn't satisfying at all. And it's because I know in my heart that I'm watching a superhero movie and I want a superhero movie ending where the lead characters like physically triumph over the threat that they have been facing this whole time. And this was the thing where all of the characters outsmarted the threat that they were facing, and they did it well. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they didn't, but it just doesn't satisfy in the way that I want a superhero story to work. And you can sit there all you want and go, well, we weren't making a superhero story. We were making a, like, mystery thriller story with superheroic elements. I don't give a crap. You were making a superhero movie based on superheroes. Every one of these characters was a costumed adventurer at one point or another, and just because you've temporarily thrown them into your thriller movie doesn't mean they're suddenly not superhero characters. You either made a bad thriller movie with superhero elements, or you made a bad superhero movie with thriller elements. I don't care which one you want to pick. They did not combine very well in this final culmination. And I don't know what I would have done to do any better, and this is what I mean when I said that sometimes in trying to tell a story that is different from everything else you're getting, you're also telling a story that is ultimately not satisfying because the rest of it works for a reason, right? And when you deviate from the way everything else works, you're creating something that works not nearly as well. And so while I thought this ending was intelligent and well thought out and works perfectly for the characters in the situation, I was still sitting there going like, that's what killed him? The P in a Pepsi sign fell down and killed Ezekiel. Are you kidding me? I've seen Spider-Man take harder hits than this. Like, and this guy's clearly meant to be like an evil Spider-Man. Why does he not have the same level of strength that Spider-Man does? How did he not survive this? And then I also have the problem. So one of the biggest complaints that I've been seeing online is that everybody's like, oh, they showed all the Spider-Women in these costumes, but then they're not in them in the movie. And the director and some of the actresses have defended that decision, being like, well, we're teasing what could come next. We're teasing the future here. We want you to be invested in whatever the next step in the story is. And one, you never know if you're going to get the next step in one of these stories, especially when you're a Sony-produced movie. You think we're going to get a Morbius 2? No. Let's face it, the only reason Venom is continuing to get movies is because Tom Hardy is the lead character in them, and he's the only thing selling it at this point. It's not because they're good. And so on the one hand, I think it's really frustrating and stupid to do all this work teasing a movie that might not ever happen. However, if you were to go to me and go, Ben, we want you to make a Spider-Man-less Spider-Man movie, I would be thinking in terms of a trilogy because I would want to be setting up things to see in the next one. I won't lie, I would have done not this exact same movie, but I would have done something similar in terms of let's introduce a character and set them up for the next step in whatever this movie adventure is. But the real problem I have with it is we don't have any kind of structure for what the next thing's going to be. Like, you can tease us, well, there's these 3 young women and they're going to become Spider-Women at some point, but how? Why? When? And to what purpose? Who are they fighting? Ezekiel's dead. And as far as we know, there's no other superpowered beings in this world at this moment. Unless you're going to do something weird and then do like, you cut to 2004 and you've got a 24-year-old Spider-Man teaming up with a like 30 to 40-year-old Spider-Woman, which you could do, I guess, but like, why? Like, what do you think the next movie in this is going to be? Julia Cornwall, the next Spider-Woman? Aranya? What is this supposed? How is this supposed to work? I don't fucking know. I don't know, and it frustrates me that rather than be excited for what comes next, I'm just confused about what comes next. Because this movie, other than saying we'd really like to do more, doesn't do anything to entice you to the next thing. And it's just really frustrating. I honestly don't mind that they tease the girls in costume, because again, this is an origin movie. I said it in the beginning when I did my pre-show rant. This is an origin movie for Madam Web and these other characters. It makes sense to me that they're not going to be fully costumed superheroes as of yet, and honestly, I'm fine with it. If I have any complaint about the costumes, it's that outside of Julia Carpenter as Spider-Woman / Arachne, the other two characters don't look very good. Maddie Franklin had a variety of different costumes, and I think they went with one of the ones that Bart Sears designed. If I remember correctly, Bart Sears designed a different costume for Maddie in almost every issue of her volume of Spider-Woman, and I believe they went with this particular costume, which hopefully I will have on screen at this point. So I guess it works. I just don't think it looks as good on screen as it does on paper. And honestly, I didn't even like it on paper. I think out of all the Spider-Women, Maddie has had a series of the ugliest looks overall. I'm sorry. And then, like I said, as far as Aranya, they've really ditched, and in Aranya's defense, the character doesn't really have much of a costume. When the character originally appeared, she would either wear like a tank top that was white with like a red spider on it, and now that I say that out loud, Anya in the movie wears a like, not quite a tank top, but like her belly button showing the whole movie. I wonder if actually that was a costuming nod. That's actually kind of, somebody read an Aranya comic or two. That's kind of neat. She does have not quite the goggles that Aranya had, but she does have like a big eyepiece covering. I would assume you could have them be goggles if you wanted to. And she does use her like spider bullwhip thing. I don't know. But in terms of overall coloring, it does not evoke Aranya to me at all, which again is just a shame. I don't know what I would have done differently as far as that's concerned, but it's just one of those things where it feels like we're really missing everything about Aranya that made the character special and unique in this particular version of the character. And maybe if you were going to crap out a sequel, that's where you would go into it, but I don't think we're going to get to crap out a sequel now, guys. I think from a storytelling perspective, this movie would have been better, let's say, if they hadn't picked 3 Spider-Women and they had picked one instead to act as a surrogate mother, to have Cassie act as a surrogate mother too. That way you could have focused more on Cassie's relationship with this one character and built this one character up more and made them a more interesting, more naturalized, more holistic person, as opposed to the 3 barely existing characters that we get in the Spider-Women. You could have had literally the same story beats with Cassie, and I think that would have worked fine. I don't know what I would have done to fix Ezekiel, because I don't think Ezekiel was really he definitely was antagonistic to Spider-Man in his early appearances, but I don't think he was really like the bad guy. He was tough on Spider-Man because he knew more about every situation that was going on than Spider-Man did. And Spider-Man would stumble in and he'd be like, "Kid, you're an idiot." Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I'll fully admit I have not read J. Michael Straczynski's run on Spider-Man, which is where Ezekiel comes from. So maybe my read of his character's incorrect. But I don't know what I would do to fix him. But overall, the movie's a really mixed bag. Again, I honestly think all of the characters do a good job with what they're given. I think that what they were given wasn't very good. And I think that as an end result, you have an uneven movie with a weird bit of pacing that does honestly create something that I'd like to see more of now that we've got like the framework in place and you've got Cassandra Webb fully like comfortable with her powers. She knows how to use her visions and trigger her visions and use them to her benefit. She's been blinded. They've got her in her like motorized wheelchair, where classically she would sit in like one of those Professor X style like hover chairs. I don't know why. I guess now that she's blind, she's just walking with a walking stick is too dangerous for her. She's just going to sit in a chair the whole time. I don't really know. But now that like that framework's in place, like I go, oh, okay, like I can see what another movie would be really easily. And rather than have it be like Madam Web 2, The Webbening or something like that, I would have it be like Arachne, the next Spider-Woman or something like that. And you would pick one of the Spider-Women and they would be going on an adventure, and the rest of these characters would be their surrounding cast as they went on their adventure. And then that movie would end, and that character would have learned whatever lesson they were going to have learned, and then you would go on to your next movie, assuming you were going to be able to make a next movie. So yeah, overall, Madam Web's an absolute mixed bag. I don't think it's terrible. I don't think it's worth the $20 at the box office. If I didn't have AMC A-List, I probably would not have paid to go see this movie. A lot of people have said they're going to wait for streaming, and I think that's kind of the best way to do it. But overall, for me, like if I were going to rate it out of stars, I would give it a like 3 out of 5. It's not terrible, but it's not great. And with Konark screaming in the background, I think I'm going to give him the final word on it and leave you all there. Thank you for listening to Madam Web, and we'll see you on the next regularly scheduled episode of the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.